Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Empowering Musicians. And I am Michael Manley. I'm a musician, artist, and labor advocate, educator, and writer. And I'm sitting down today with my good friend, Valerie Gebert, who has spent her life as a theater musician. Welcome, Valerie. Why don't you introduce yourself and give us an idea of what your career's been like?
Wow, that's a tall order right away. My name is Valerie Gebert. My career has been great. I have nothing but wonderful things to say about what I've done, how I did it, how it happened, and I have had a great experience working in the Broadway theater. I am not in the classical world. I'm in the Broadway music theater, mostly touring. Although I did live in New York for 30 years, so I did lots of things in New York, from never really sat down with a show other than to sub on some keyboard parts now and then, and have a small run with some shows here and there. But most of my life has been on the road with these touring shows that have become very popular since the 90s to send tours out. Before that, I grew up in a family of my mother's side of the family is extremely musical. They all play brass instruments or sing. We're brothers and sisters. And my grandma and grandpa, when they were done raising their children, they joined the Salvation Army so they could continue playing their instruments every day. So music was a big deal on my mother's side. I think my father's side of the family would agree that they're all tone deaf. So we got none of our musical genes. I have two sisters, and they were musical as well. We took piano lessons and dance lessons, and I studied cello in junior high school, and they did other instruments. I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota, and everybody thinks, Fargo is pretty much a podunk. No, it's where if you take a map of the United States and fold it in half, then Fargo is directly in the middle. It's right there on the crease. But Fargo has three universities. And this means there was a wealth of talent in the community and opportunities to get involved. And that's where I first got involved in playing for theaters in summer stock at a local college at the Straw Hat Players in Moorhead, Minnesota, which is right across the river from Fargo. So it's a Twin City kind of thing. There were three universities, and I was exposed at an early age from Broadway came in as guest artists to this theater, and I had never ever even considered theater as an option. I didn't know what I was going to do. Remember, it was the late 60s and 70s. It was very loosey-goosey, and nobody had to pick anything. You just go out and go have your year in Europe and try to find yourself. But I fell in love with playing for the Thunderstock as one of the pianists, and I learned how to handle rehearsals and be an effective rehearsal pianist just by doing it with people from the professional world in New York. So right away, I had very good teachers. And I went to school out on the East Coast. I went to Brown University, and it's very loosey-goosey there in the 70s. You could study whatever you wanted. And they would say, who wants to conduct the musical? And I said, well, I do. They didn't ask me if I knew how to conduct. I said, what's the big deal? You just raise your hand and do something, patterns. I can do patterns. And so all of a sudden I'm conducting orchestras. And I realized, wait, there's way more to it than just patterns. You have to do, and all of a sudden, the rest of the music director world is not just the pianist world anymore, but the whole world of collaboration and being involved and being in the room. I want to stress this, being in the room with the rehearsal, meaning paying attention and caring about what the director's doing in the scene or what the choreographer is doing in terms of the routine and how to accompany the drama part of what's going on stage, and how to negotiate rehearsrsal times. I mean, that I think is the biggest thing that musical directors have to work out is how do you estimate how long you need to teach somebody something. Because in school or in regional theaters, you have this wealth of rehearsal time, just oodles and oodles of time to practice. And in the professional world, time is money, and you have a very limited period, and you need to get X, Y, and Z done by the end of the day. And that's just it. You need to teach all of this music to all of these people by the end of today, or whatever the parameters are. And you have to know how to do that and manage your time. So time management skills are learned, as you try things out. And that's a very important factor that can make or break a successful music director, is how they manage time. And then after Brown, I went straight to New York, and with $150 in my pocket. That's all I had. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no idea. I didn't think I was going to be in the theater. And the very first thing, I was involved in an off-Broadway show after the first month. I'm a pianist. They needed a pianist, a replacement. I did the off-Broadway show. I met the music director, who then started working in Broadway. And this is the networking part. One person I met, his name is David Friedman, and he started getting Broadway shows. And there was a Broadway show called Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, starring Barry Gibb, and on Broadway. And he needed a sub for one of the keyboard parts. Well, I'm still not a music director, but I took him up on that, and I became a sub, because who knows where that's going to lead. So I learned how to sub on a book, which is a whole nother discussion we could have. And then he said, "Hey, Valerie, we're sending a tour of this out. Joseph is going to go on tour, 1983, with David Cassidy as the lead. Would you like to be the music director?" Just like that. It was just dropped into my lap. I said, "Whoa, sign me up. Sign me up." So whatever qualities are needed, that he saw them in me. And I got my first opportunity because of connections and because I had done enough preliminary work to look like I know what I was doing. And that's half the battle, is to just be in the room, watch what's going on, care, and be a team player. And then from then on, well, the contracts kept coming in for various tours. I've toured with stars like Marie Osmond and Donny Osmond in Sound of Music for Marie, and Joseph with Donny, Robert Goulet for the Fantastics. And then I've done various Tony Award-winning shows on tour, like Cabaret, the Sam Mendes Cabaret, and then my long-term Lion King. I did 3 companies of the Lion King, 2 tours, and then I met you in Las Vegas.
Yep.
Playing the sit-down Las Vegas Lion King. I mean, I met the player. I had known you in the FM before that, but as a player. And then all through the teens, every year and a half, I would get a new show. I went Addams Family, Wicked, Cinderella, Finding Neverland, and my last show was Anastasia. And I have never, my downtime has been very, very little. So I didn't have a place to live because I had to give up my New York apartment. So I've been living out of a suitcase since 2004.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the COVID hit, and our show, Anastasia, decided to send us all home, and we weren't going to resume the tour. And I had to decide where I was going to live, and I chose Chicago. So I'm here in this wonderful town that has life and theater and art and, as you know, food.
Yes.
Because you are a foodie. And so there I am. Here I am.
That's
now.
Great. And Chicago is a great theater town and food town, so you chose well. I think what's interesting about theater is just how exciting and varied, but also kind of stressful, because you're only as good as your last show, right? And this is what people don't understand. In the orchestral world, ballet and opera, if you win a job and you're lucky enough to get tenure, then you have a lot of job security. Whereas in our field, except for certain exceptions, most of these tours are 2-year tours, and you have to worry about how you're going to you get your next gig, right? So that networking and that really being prepared and being ready is so key, because you're always having to kind of start over in a way.
Yes, this is something that people ask me. Well, do you belong to an agency that finds you jobs, or does working for one show mean that you'll have? Is there any guarantee that you're going to have future employment? And there is no guarantee in this particular world I've chosen. There's no guarantee, and every job is a gig. It's a long gig. Sometimes it's a year, a year and a half, 2 years, whatever. A Lion King was a series of long gigs for me. But every time you start from a very, maybe not zero, but it is just, you start from scratch, and you have to do the cold calling or the reminding people that you're available, and because they forget, if you're working, they've forgotten you. And when it comes time to getting another job, you have to remind them who you are. And that's when having any kind of a connection with someone involved in that new production is very helpful, because that person can go to bat for you and say, hey, I think she'd be an excellent choice. Perhaps not the conductor, but she's a great associate conductor. And oftentimes the conductor leaves for other jobs. They make a deal to do the show for a certain period of time, and I have taken over as the conductor after I've served the term as the associate for a while. So a lot of people won't do that. They will only work as the main number one. But I have found that I don't mind moving into the number one slot after I've done the associate.
That's great.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think is unique about theater work is that, especially if you think about some of the folks on some of these long tours, like some of our colleagues on the Lion King Gazelle tour, let's say, they've probably played the Lion King like 10,000 times by now in a row, right? And so how does a music director keep it new and fresh every time? And how do musicians who have to play the same show over and over again sort of maintain their sanity and their commitment and their musicianship when they're doing the same show over and over again?
I hate it when people say this, but that's a very good question. It is, because I think let's start with the musicians. Their happiness is directly related to what we call the hang. And the hang is the compatibility between the players. I think if you have a group of people that get together every night playing the same exact notes for the same show, if they enjoy each other's company and find humor and joy in somebody says something, or they play something with just a little bit different flair on it, they're involved in the community part of making music. It makes a long tour a lot easier. And they also play with each other during the day. They go out to museums, they go to movies, they do social things. If you don't have that, it can be a very long, unhappy tour with unhappy people. Yeah, and I've been on those too, there's just some element that is cringeworthy. I'm going to tell a cringeworthy story. I joined, why not? I joined a company of chorus line in Europe, and I was a replacement keyboard player. And I was one of two girls in the pit, and it was the full chorus line pit. So it's a lot of players. But we were in a satellite room, which means not under the stage, and it was a tiny, tiny room. And the other girl was the harpist. And we were squished in, and everybody was in. So you smelled people. Let's just put it that way. We were on top of each other. And I had the bass trombone's bell right next to my face. And he was on a garlic regimen for some health reason.
Wow.
And every time he would blow, he would come out, and it was like green clouds. And I would get sick to my stomach. And and everybody else was sick, but nobody seemed to have the courage to talk to him about his garlic. Well, I found a way, and I asked him, I said, could you not take the pills before the show? He says, sure. Anyway, we solved it. But, it was a bad scene because everybody was pissed about it for so long, and they were unhappy coming into the, anyway, we fixed that. So as a player, it's about the hang, the group of people that you enjoy coming and working with every night. And the fact that you're playing the same note over and over again, it becomes comfortable. And you begin to notice the differences that the conductor, now we're going to the conductor has to be aware of, because every show is not the same for the conductor. In this world, every show has something new in it. There's a different person on in this role, or this dancer has never done this before, so it's it is a debut of a person, or it's a combination of actors that haven't done it, so the timing of lines is different, and those kinds of things perk the band up. Like, oh, well, that was different. Oh, what's up? Oh, great. And here's where the music director has to be in the room. You have to be in every single performance. You have to perform with them, because I like to think that the energy comes from the music director. You sort of well it up out of you. You send it up to the stage. They then do their performance, and they give it back to the audience, and the audience returns it to them with applause and cheers. So it comes from the conductor up to the stage and out and back. It's a great circle.
Yeah, it's true, and there is something, even though it's very repetitive, but there is something about the live aspect where you're like, this is the audience's first time with this piece. And even though I've played it 700 times, it's their first time hearing it. And some of my favorite stories of the theater, I just wanted to share a couple. Like, this is what makes live theater great. I was doing a show called Miss Saigon, which is the Madame Butterfly story. And it ends on a very somber and sad note where the lead character kills herself. And she has these, she has this moment at the end of the show where she confesses her love and to her American boyfriend as she's dying. It's a very quiet moment, very, very serious. And we were performing a performance that was during, I want to say, the World Series or something. And so all the men in the audience were listening to the World Series on their radios. And so there was like a home run or something that happened right during this moment. So like during this moment you heard yes, and you heard like cheers coming from the audience because they're all listening to the home run that just happened. But great stories in the world of theater. And my feeling is that the people that are the most sane are the ones that like actually have other things that they're doing. Like, I know you and our dearly departed Jeff Johnson were huge birders, and you would use this opportunity to tour the country to yeah, there you go, to actually like indulge your birding passion. And the ones who are crazy are the ones that try to get everything out of what they're doing and their whole self-concept in their life. And I also remember on Miss Saigon, we had a few years where our pit was just very dysfunctional. And I remember just somebody complaining about another colleague, and everybody was at each other's throats. And at one point I just said, if this is so important to you, go play Brahms in an orchestra or something. Like, if that's, because this is a show about a helicopter. Like, this is what this is. It's not that we're careless about what we do, but like, if playing out of tune on that one note, or not being in sync with this one person on this one note is driving you insane, like, maybe go do something else, because this is like a submarine here, and we're all in this little tunnel of a pit together, and we got to get along, so.
It's like a submarine. It's true. Remember, you poor brass people in the Lion King Las Vegas, you were stuck under the stairs, the house left stairs, in this god-awful low ceiling area. And when you had 3 French horns, 2 trombones blowing in a semicircle at each other.
Yeah, we were kind of like in a V, and like the trombone bells were like pointed right at our faces. And Yeah. But luckily we had a good brass section in terms of people that all got along. I mean, I think we would sometimes have to have conversations about volume levels and stuff, but it was for the most part a pretty good group. And you're right, it's like when you're working that closely with people, you know, it's a good thing you get along. I mean, it's ironic that my friend Dave, who I sat next to, is actually my neighbor now here in Las Vegas, and we got along very well, which was good because we sat literally a foot from each other for years. So. And let's talk a little bit more about networking. And I titled this, Is All This Networking Really Necessary? And I was kind of quoting another theater story that I love, which has to do with our friend Bob Billig. This is how I've heard the story, that he was conducting Les Mis in Detroit. And it was using a local band of musicians. And he was rehearsing. And Les Mis is a very, through composed, very operatic show. And there's lots and lots of detail work, and he's rehearsing, and one of the horn players finally just raised his hand and said, "Is all this nuance really necessary?" I love that story. And the answer is yes, it is. So is all this networking really necessary, and how do we do it?
Oh my God. Well, it's even more necessary now with social media because of this, the way of the world. You need to have your name known, and it needs to be known in a good way. So yes, networking is very important. Even back before social media, back before there were cell phones, it was important to take whatever job came up that you felt comfortable doing. I mean, you're not going to always be thrown a Broadway job. You're going to be thrown, or it's going to come into your life, these opportunities to do things that may, on first looking at them, not sound like they're very glamorous or aren't going to forward your career. But you don't know who you're going to meet on that gig, and that's why you do it, because you will meet, if nothing else, you'll meet other musicians that you're going to cross paths with, and they have a voice and they speak. They'll say they get hired for a gig and they say to the contractor, "Who's conducting?" And if the conductor says Valerie Gebert, they'll go, "Oh, great, it's going to be easy." Or, you know, if it's not me, it's somebody, you know, that they don't like, they'll go, "Oh, I'm not going to take the gig." That happens. It happens. It's happening today, because whatever pain and agony they go through during the time that they're playing the show is not worth whatever money they get paid to go through that pain and agony. So, networking is absolutely invaluable. And every time you step out in public, you're networking. Every job you take, whether you're the associate director or the rehearsal pianist, or whether you go visit a show and hang over the pit and say hello to people, that's networking. You know, I mean, you're presenting yourself, you're representing who you are, and it all works in concert. I just did a gala here in Illinois, and I didn't know who the musicians were. I didn't really recognize any of the names. That's not true. I recognized 2 names, but I had 20 people, and I get to the gig, and one by one they go, "Oh yeah, I remember you. You conducted blah blah when you came through town in Chicago. I remember. That was a good time."
Yeah.
You know, because I can't remember every single musician. Although, here's a tip for somebody who wants to be a music director: learn the names. Learn the names. It's just easy. I mean, I'm going to tell you right now: learn their friggin' names.
Yeah.
And call them by names. Don't say, "Hey, trumpet one." No, he's not trumpet one. He's Bob.
Yeah.
Learn the names.
And that's really important. And it's also, as a music director who's touring with a show that is, let's say it's a show like My Fair Lady that's hiring maybe 10 or 11 local musicians everywhere. You're dealing with a lot of different musicians, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really important to build those, especially for conductors. And conductors, I think, can be very crucial for musicians, because these national contractors who are in New York City, they don't really maybe know the musicians. The musicians that get on their radar are the people that have subbed for people they've already hired, or that music directors know. So if somebody asks you, "Hey, Valerie, we've got a tour out we need a really good lead trumpet, you're going to go into your Rolodex of people and say, okay, yeah, this, and this, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the outcome of good networking is that, I can now absolutely say that this person would be good for that job. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see my friend Ted mentioned that he's writing a musical called Scientific Method that he's getting produced. And if you have any other questions, Ted, for Valerie, feel free to put them in the chat. But Valerie, have you been part of a lot of new musicals that are just starting as a music director, and how is that role?
That's another good question. There are two types of musical director people. Maybe there are more. There are definitely two generic types. One is the innovator and one is the executor. I am an executor. You give me the product, I execute it. I am not interested in writing, shaping, developing. And then there are people who want to write, shape, and develop. And they would, for the most part, die before they did a show 8 times a week for 4 months straight. They couldn't do that. It's not creative enough for them. But people like me, the doers and the J. Algers of the world, we love to execute something that somebody's already done. So it is very different. And no, I don't have a creative musical bone in my body. And it often surprises people who are not musicians. They go, "What do you mean? You don't write yourself? You don't write anything?" I said, "Nope. Fine. Nope. And
yeah, I think that's one thing that especially people that are starting out need to understand is I always equate performance and musicians that are performing musicians more, they have more in common with athletes than they do, say, writers or composers. Because what we do is not that creative. It's really about interpreting and executing, as you said. Mm-hmm. And if you get somebody like I'm very creative myself, but I write words. I don't write music. But I don't, then there's a certain limited amount of creativity in terms of interpreting a phrase of music. But basically, we're playing what's on the page. It's very physical. We have to be in shape for it. And if you want to be creative, you should think about writing or doing other things. And we do have a lot of colleagues who are musicians and writers. I think of our friends Richard and Rob, who are very writing musicals themselves, which is exciting. And I think the one good thing about a career in this field is that if you're playing the same show over and over again, as a music director, it's a different thing because you're so absorbed with rehearsals and put-ins and all these other things. But as a side musician, the show doesn't take up your life. It doesn't take a lot of brain pan space, right? So if you do want to write or in the case of Jeff wanting to go out and monitor birds and get really involved in that that realm of work. He was so passionate about the fact that he was spending his vacations like in a bird blind counting falcons or something. I mean, but like if you want to do those really creative and interesting things, you can with these kind of jobs because they allow you that space. They're not all consuming. They're not like they're not taking your brain. You're not waking up at 3 a.m. thinking, what am I going to say at this meeting tomorrow or any of that. So that's the one good thing I think about doing something over and over again is that it does allow you the freedom to do some other things.
I wanted to, before we end, I wanted to make sure we covered, because I know a lot of people on this that are watching are either potential music directors or have been music directors and may have run into this situation. I used to, when I got on the podium, I used to use it as my stand-up comedy platform space. And I used to entertain the orchestra with stories about the show, about what was happening in this measure and why they needed to play this louder because, such and such was happening on the stage. And my dear friend, Rob Taylor, said to me, Valerie, they're just trying to just tell them faster, funnier, louder, higher, whatever. They don't care about how it relates to the show. If you need to go louder for whatever reason, just tell us louder. And so my point is, don't chat so much on the podium. Let them play. Let them play. Stop talking. The conductor that gets up there and tells you the history of the, whatever you feel like you need to have before you play your first note. I mean, you've lost them. All they want to do is play the first note. Let them play the first note. Let them get through us. Do it.
Yeah, that's very true.
And there, when a conductor, you just shut off.
Musicians do. I mean, we will respond when you say, "Hey, horns, I need this crescendo to be bigger here," or whatever. Like, it's very specific feedback. But yeah, you're right. When there's philosophizing going on, musicians just tend to tune out, sadly. And I think that's true everywhere. And I think the best conductors, even in the classical world, know how to communicate very concisely the information they need to, without going into story too much, because that loses people. Yeah. I also think that one of the things that's unique about Broadway conductors, well, there's a few things that are very, very different if you're in the classical world solely or you're in the theater world. In the theater world, for one thing, conductors are actually part of the bargaining unit in unionized workplaces, which is different than in the classical world. So in the Philadelphia Orchestra, the conductor is not part of the unit that negotiates with management over the terms and conditions of their work. They are not part of the bargaining unit. They are management. Whereas in the Broadway world, you kind of are in the bargaining unit, and you get to participate in the pension and the healthcare and all that stuff, which is great. But the other difference is that you go back to being like a side musician or an associate, and then you're a music director. So you're fluid in this way, which I think means that you can't really be that Toscanini kind of a diva personality, because eventually you're going to have to go back and sit next to these people, right? Like, so how does that inform how you approach things, knowing that you can't necessarily be that maestro who just completely runs the show all the time? And
well, I know that in the Broadway world, orchestras can tell whether or not a conductor has been one of them has sat amongst them and experienced what it is to watch a conductor do it and what's needed. They can tell. And there are some conductors that have never been sidemen, and they just don't have the same kind of rapport. It's not necessarily bad. It's just different. It's coming at it from a different attitude. But the ones of us who have played under somebody and have learned the good and the bad, and really trying to glean stuff that will be helpful, they can tell.
Yeah. And I think that relationship is really key. I remember doing an opera tour, and we always had several conductors, because it was, 10 or 12 weeks, and they would come in for 3 or 4 weeks at a time. And one younger conductor came in and actually said something to the orchestra during the warm-up before the curtain, and about what people were playing. And that was kind of one of those things where it's like, this is our space and our time. And if somebody wants to play Don Juan on the cello because they have an audition coming up, like, don't interfere. Like, don't tell us what to play in our warm-up. It was like, okay, that was bad form on his part, So I think, and there's a certain amount of trust that's lost when we don't have that relationship really down. But it's a crucial one, because you do have this positional authority, and you do have to tell people what to do, but you also are their colleague at the same time.
And to that point, we were talking earlier before we started, in the Broadway theater, the music director is not at the apex, where in opera, the maestro is up here and he's in charge. And in Broadway, because there's so many other people that are in charge: the director, the choreographer, the composer, the creators, the designers. You work with them, and you are much more subservient and need to serve the piece as opposed to shape the piece from the pit. And it's a different mindset than classical music.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that Ted has asked a really good question, which is about how do we get new musicals in front of the right eyes and ears. I will say, my advice, Ted, is to see if you can get a production, even in the tiniest theater, if you're self-producing it. I'm a playwright, but I also co-wrote a musical with our dear friend Angela Chan. And what I found was it was much like with my plays, I've had lots of readings, and at some point you really do have to get the physical choreography, and you have to get the physical business in there. My plays tended to be very physical, and it just doesn't come across in a reading. At some point you're like, okay, I think I've learned as much as I can learn in a reading, and I just really need to produce this. Because I find that if somebody reads my work or sees a full production, I get better feedback than if I try to do a workshop or like a reading of it. Because in a reading, when we have people reading the stage directions aloud, for example, that takes me out of the experience, and I don't process information orally. Whereas if I was reading it on a page, it would make sense to me. So I think with theater, having a production is really key. As tiny as you can do it, I know with our show, Legacy of the Tiger Mother, we started out in a very, very tiny theater in Las Vegas. And it was great because we actually did a production, and we didn't workshop it to death. I think that, and I also think that we need to be very careful. I find that the feedback from audiences is much more honest than from other writers and sometimes directors in the theater. Actors and the audience will tell you whether something's working or not. That's been my experience. Have you had any experience with that, Valerie?
I know I've done a few festivals of new works. There are festivals, especially in New York. I don't know about LA. You know, LA is not known for its theater scene the way that New York is. There are certainly theater things going on in LA, but I don't think they've got as much of a support system for up and coming writers as they do in New York. There are festivals, and you apply to the festivals and you submit your work, and you end up having to pay a lot of money to have them put up. I don't think, you know, but they get seen and people come, and yeah, that's what you want. You got to sell out some bucks.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I know that we did a couple festivals, the San Francisco Fringe Festival. There was another festival in New York City, but it's essentially like it's an invitation for you to pay a lot of money and produce the show yourself. So you got to, but those things, especially I would say, the San Francisco one was effective. We did one in Adelaide, Australia that was very effective. New York is hard because there's so much that's happening in New York City that things get lost. I would say if there's a musical theater festival happening in the Midwest somewhere, you're actually probably going to get a lot more attention. I went to a theater conference in Valdez, Alaska, a few summers in a row, and it was great because there was all these other writers and theater folk in the room. But I think sometimes also the audiences in those places are going to be better for new work. In New York City, people have seen everything, and they're going to compare your work to everything else they've seen. Whereas in Iowa, you're going to be like, people are going to give you like their honest reaction. I either didn't get that or I understood it or I didn't understand it. And for me, I think the value of the production is finding out what works, not only what works in a show, but what's clear and what's not clear. Does the audience, is it understood that this character is leaving the stage through the door and then coming back 5 minutes later, and are they understanding like the mechanics of the piece in a way? And that's what I think a production will give you, is just like, is this making sense? Is this clear or is it not clear? My friend Bill Hoffman, who was a very important writer, mentor of mine, used to tell me, don't be subtle. You know, I would be writing these things and he'd be like, the audience isn't going to get that. You got to be really, really clear and really like put a sign on it that this is what's happening and this is what's going on. It's a very different style of writing. You can't write James Joyce Ulysses on stage. You've got to be very, very clear with what's happening and what your language is and those things. So I think that's about the most I can think of, Ted, but I wish you luck with your show, and I hope I get to see it someday. Well, thank you so much, Valerie. We've gone over a little bit of time. How do people find you? On Facebook, they can connect with you if they have any questions.
Absolutely. Sure.
There's also a great musical theater group on Facebook. I think it's called Musical Theater Directors. People can think about those things, but look for Valerie Gebert, Valerie Gebert on Facebook if you're listening to us. This is also a podcast we're currently on Spotify, trying to get us on Apple. So happy to have folks listen later after the fact. And so much, thank you so much, Valerie, for your time today. And I'll look forward to seeing you again soon, maybe under the stage.
I hope so.
Take care. We'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.